Well, our IT department sent us there was a Zoom update we needed to do today. If you don't go in through your regular internet browser. So that might have something to do with it.
Why can't they leave well enough alone?
It's all the updates. It's not them.
I got 6:30, Tom.
Yeah. Channel 18.
We're good to go.
We're good to go. Thank you. Before I open up the hearing for the Barnstable Conservation Commissions, I would like to ask George to do a roll call for the quorum purpose.
Abadili,
Present.
Foster,
Present.
Gilmore, present. Hearn,
Present.
Lee,
Present.
Moran,
Present.
Sampu,
Present.
Administrator Darcy Carley,
Present.
Staff Member Kim Kavanaugh.
Present.
We have a quorum and we are ready to go.
Thank you. Acting under the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, and Chapter 237 of the Code of Town of Barnstable, the Barnstable Conservation will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, November the 8th, 2022, at 6:30 p.m. For the first time ever, we do not have any application in RTA or NOIs tonight, but we have two continuances. The hearing will be held remotely as televised on Channel 18. The plans and applications are on file and may be reviewed by scheduling appointments by sending email requests to Darcy Curley at 230 South Street, Hyannis. This meeting is being recorded and transmitted by the Information Technology Department of the Town of Barnstable on Channel 18. Under Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20, anyone else desiring to make such a recording or transmission, please let Channel 18 know I know. Hearing none. This evening's hearing agenda is posted on the town's website. On the agenda next to each application is the amount owed to the Town of Barnstable for the cost of advertising. Please send your checks to Conservation Division at 230 South Street before the hearing. Remote participation. The Conservation Commission's public hearing will be held by remote participation as a result of an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed by the Lieutenant Governor on July 16, 2022, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. Remote public access to this hearing shall be provided in the following manner. 1, the hearing will be televised via Channel 18. Second, the real-time public comment can be addressed to the Conservation Commission utilizing Zoom link 874-327-80598 or use the toll-free phone number 888-475-4499 as shown on the agenda. The public can also email their comment to darcy.curley@town.barnstable.ma.us at least 8 hours prior to the hearing. As I mentioned, we have two continuances tonight. The first one is Matthew and Lori Kelly. Relocate existing dwelling, vegetation management, resurface existing step stones, add handrails and lighting on pathways to beach at 554 Vinyl Avenue, Barnstable, as shown on the Assessors Map 162, Parcel 013. This is a continuance from October the 4th, and it is solely for the receipt of the NHSP letter. And the form is everyone. And we have received the NHSP letter dated October the 11th. And under the Wetland Protection Act, the division has determined that this project, as currently proposed, will not adversely affect the actual resource area habitat or state protected rare wildlife species. Under the MISA, the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act, the division has determined that this project is currently proposed will not result in a prohibited take of the state listed rare species. Could I have a motion to close the public hearing and authorize the staff to issue the order conditions for these applications?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili,
Aye.
Foster,
I'm not on the quorum.
Tom said everybody was.
I thought everyone was.
It's open to October 4th.
Yeah,
Yes, but it was continued with no testimony on October 4th. It was continued from a previous hearing, which you were attended, I believe.
I thought you,
I need to abstain then because I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. No problem. Gilmore, aye. Kern,
aye,
Lee,
aye,
Moran,
Aye.
Sampu.
Aye.
That carries, Mr. Chairman.
thank you. Good night, Matt.
Thank you. Good night.
The second continues, Helen Hughes to construct and maintain fixed piers, ramp and float at 94 Long Beach Road, Sandyville, as shown on the assessors map 206 parcel 007. This is a continuance from October the 11th, and the application still in front of the waterway and harbor master for review. And so the applicant has requested for a second continuance without testimony to December the 6th, 2022. Could I have a motion to approve the continuance without testimony to December the 6th, 2022?
I'll move.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Sampu,
Aye.
Moran,
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Kern.
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. That's unanimous.
Thank you. We are on to the last item on this agenda. This is a discussion of the chapter 704. Couple of things I just want to mention before I open up the floor. One, the initial purpose of this redraft is to trying to clarify the language of the chapter 704, because what the language in there versus what we our interpretation and use is different. So I just want to make sure that the language and what our interpretation jive the same, so because otherwise it becomes a problem. And before I do that, and then I kind of ask, John and Louise, and see, they have the same interpretation of what I'm reading in the current chapter 704. And the answer is yes. And that's why I kind of formed that subcommittee to look at this problem. So I invited John, Louise, and myself to work with Darcy and Eds to provide some support from their expertise on this point. Thank you for the comments and the public comment. Based on those comments, we kind of go back to the drawing board and then we drafted based on what we think that we would simplify some of the questions that we have and the public, and that's what we come up with this redraft. The one thing I want to mention though is, starting from tonight, we are talking about a discussion among the commissioners. So once we have this discussed, and then we can see how we come up with a final, let's say the final version it's acceptable before we go off a public comment. And that would take some time depending on how the process and the workload is. So I don't have any timeline per se as far as when do we have to finish it. I will try to schedule as quickly as possible, but I'm not going to stick to a timeline. Say I have to finish by when and so forth, because there's a lot of questions, comment, and stuff like that come up that we may have to resolve on that one. There's two comments that we got from Larry and Bill, and thank you for spending the time and looking at doing the review for chapter 704. And this is an important process for us to go through the comments and see how we can come up with one central one agreeable format to go out for public comment. So this may be a couple of meetings or not, I don't know, depending on how it goes. So with that, I want to give it to John to say a few things first, and then Louise, and then we'll open up the floor.
Thank you, Tom. I think a couple things are important from at least the perspective that I have. One is that Tom's assignment for us is, we're not sitting here to review the whole thing. We just want to clarify the interpretation that the commission has been using. And I think it's really, really important that we put aside the words for a second that are on this piece of paper and talk about the concept that we wanted to establish. And I think it's critical for the commission to agree, yeah, conceptually that's right, or it's not right, and I'd like to add or subtract something from it. So the concept was that the 0 to 50 is absolutely essential for kind of like a first line of defense from the pollution problems that we're having in our waterways. So we wanted to enhance the protection for the 0 to 50. And that, by the way, includes the resource, because it's kind of like the resource in the 0 to 50. What we had said is that if it is an undisturbed 50, as we define it, fully vegetated, et cetera, then if somebody wants to do something in the 0 to 50, the answer is no, because it is undisturbed and it's going to remain undisturbed. Second principle was if they wanted to do something into 0 and the 50 to 100, if it is an undisturbed 50, we said, okay, we're going to give you an incentive. We're going to allow you to expand in the 50 to 100. And I think Bill's going to want to talk about that when you get a chance, Bill. But the concept was that, okay, in order to continue to keep that 50-foot undisturbed, we will allow you to expand in the 50 to 100. Again, subject to commission review, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then we faced the issue of the disturbed 0 to 50. And our current regulation said if you've got a disturbed 0 to 50, then if you want to do something in the 50 to 100, you must mitigate at a 3-to-1 ratio. We wanted to clarify in this draft that mitigation must first go in the resource area and within the first 50 feet. That's where the plantings have to go that the commission approves if you want to expand in the 50 to 100. If that resulted, if the 3-to-1 mitigation was, 500 square feet, but all it took was 200 square feet to give us a fully undisturbed 50, that's all you had to do. So that's the principle that we were trying to establish in here. We also said that if you want to expand in the 0 to 50, hardscape within the 0 to 50, that requires a specific waiver. And that waiver would only be granted at the discretion of the commission if we thought that the mitigation you were offering at a minimum 4 to 1, perhaps more, if and only if we felt that mitigation would enhance the performance of the 0 to 50 buffer zone, would the waiver be granted? So it was a balancing act. I know some commissioners have a concern with we should never allow any expansion in the 0 to 50. Don't mind talking about that. But the feeling was, and what the commission has done consistently, is a balancing act. We've said, sure, you can expand. We will consider a waiver in the 0 to 50 if and only if what you are giving us is a greater environmental impact than any negative impact of an expansion in the 0 to 50. It's a balancing act. And I think it's important to see that the commission has the discretion to say, even if you offer a trade, if we don't think it's going to benefit the performance of the 0 to 50 from an environmental point of view, we will not grant a waiver. It's not an automatic approval, no matter what. I think a good example of that was that when we had the last meeting where somebody wanted to put expand within the 0 to 50 next to the Centerville River, and they offered some improvement in the driveway, which was in the 0 to 50 next to the salt marsh. And I, for one, and I think everybody else agreed, that's not a good trade. That's not a good trade from an environmental point of view. So, but for the addition that they added, I suspect the commission would have voted to say, no, you don't get a waiver. The one thing that we came across from the public hearing, when there was a lot of public testimony, was, listen, and Darcy brought this up, what happens if you've got an old house, old property that's been there for 100 years, that has got a minor incursion into the 0 to 50? We then add an exception, and I think this is a change, at least as I read it, I think it's a change, was in that very last paragraph, where it said the commission may in its sole discretion consider an intrusion in the 50-foot buffer, which predates the Wetlands Protection Act of 72 as justification and modified, and we wrote this, the extent or the nature of the mitigation required. it's perfectly, we purposely put in the word or nature, because if somebody comes in, wants to add, they've got a pre-existing disturbance, pre-existing the Wetlands Protection Act, then we could say, all right, we want you, and you want to do something in the 50 to the 100, we want you, maybe you could do a little bit less mitigation. Instead of 3 to 1, it's 2 to 1, and or you could propose a different nature of mitigation, such as the innovative septic systems, which I know we really like as a commission, I think, speaking generally. So that's where we were coming from in the drafting. I think we messed up the first time because the words became so complicated. Even I was part of the writing, I didn't understand what the hell we said. Be honest with you, Peter. Hopefully the words now reflect that concept. So I think we should focus on the concept first and then look at the words later to say, well, here's the concept we agreed to. Do the words say that? Okay, I'll shut up. Sorry, Bill and Peter. I can see you guys chewing at the bit here. I'll keep quiet at this point.
Thanks, John. Louis, you want to say a few words?
Sure. Let's see. I'd like to thank Bill and Larry for they obviously did a lot of thinking and a lot of writing, and thank them for the submissions that they sent around to everyone. There was a lot of work there, and very, very important to the process. I agree with Tom's assessment that our goal was for a clarification only. And with the exception of the change that John just mentioned, this is for clarification purposes only, and I think that's really important. And also, I agree with John's overview of the goals for creating this draft. I'd just like to say that we responded to the comments that we heard last time, which said, this is too confusing, it's too complicated, we don't understand what this is about. And we basically started from scratch and worked hard to keep this as simple as possible in terms of communicating what our goals for actually delivering in this, in this draft were, while staying as close as possible to the existing 704. So, with that in mind, I think I pass it back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Louise. Let me go to Larry first.
His hand up first, Pete. Do you want to go first, or you want me to go first? You pointing at me?
He wants you to go first.
All right, that's fine. I'm going to take a slightly different turn in addition to what I put in the write-up that I did. First of all, I'm going to go back 8 or 9 years ago. At that time, when Dennis was the chair, I talked to him and I said, I would like to form a subcommittee of 2 other commissioners, and I don't care who they are at this point. And I would like to bring up a few issues, one of which dealt with the butter notification and a few other things. And it was decided at that time that, Scott and Tom was vice chair at that time, and he volunteered. So the 3 of us started having hearings. They were, first of all, the commission approved the creation of a subcommittee. That has not happened in the case we have now. That never was brought before us as a commission. So we did that, and we struggled because we brought 3 very independently minded people into a meeting room with a challenge. And those of you that know Scott, I don't have to explain. But in the process of doing that, we never could come to a consensus on the topics. We never could zero and focus in on it. I was so-called the chair. Maybe I screwed up. But nonetheless, the important thing I'm trying to stress is that the formation of the committee was formed right from the outset, openly with the whole entire commission. In this particular instance, my concern is that the narrowing of the issues or the confining of the issues to clarifications has never been voted upon. We haven't had a vote if that's what we want to do with it. But that being said, I still think that is a troublesome thing that needs to be addressed. But in my write-up, and I'm going back on what John Abadili just said, I'm going back to try to follow the track that I thought you were trying to convey. And in the process of doing that, I went back to definitions. Under the definition section, I tried to refine some things. Bill did a masterful job of writing up things, and then at the end, putting a summary as to how he suggested the wording could be done. I may not have done that. I still can do it, but not tonight. So my concerns are well laid out there. I don't want to tie up time right now, but I'll come back to them as we go along. My concern is that there's more than one issue that needs to be done, and I've tried to arrange it sequentially as to the 0 to, actually, the resource area gets thrown in there first. So the resource area, the 0 to 50, and the 50 to 100. I've tried to put the sequence of the provisions in that way, and cross-referencing. There's too many sloppy definitions or descriptions saying we've covered it somewhere else, we've got it covered. No, that's not going to work. You got to cross-reference it to another section that exists or to some other source, so there's no uncertainty. So that I'm going to stop now at that point, but I'm not done. So Pete, if you want to go next, whoever Tom wants to call, that's fine.
Pete?
Okay, well, good voices all around. John, my fellow commissioners, I think we can agree that while a 50-foot buffer is sort of our ultimate goal, an undisturbed 50-foot buffer, I think we should acknowledge that our guiding principle, our guiding mission as a commission is the protection of our wetland and water resources. That is what we should essentially focus on, and only that. If it is satisfied with the 0 to 50 undisturbed buffer, then okay. But that is what we are supposed to be doing. The evaluation of a project where we might allow something to happen in a no-touch zone, I think should have as an enhancement, and John, you were mentioning this and I liked it, but I would just, the enhancement of the overall buffer rather than if that overall buffer, sometimes we assess it that way as well, the overall buffer. But one of my questions, and just an observation, and I'm of late being a little worried about this. And John, you brought it up very nicely with, I can't remember which one it was, but it was where, yes, it was just the other week where someone was developing a lot of property in the 50 to 100. And you brought up there were 3 trees. That's the only thing that we were asking for. Trying to at least save some quality of our 50 to 100, because what Bill has done quite eloquently with lots of references is the 50 to 100 does matter. And some have said in this reference, Audubon should be bigger. Other states have got it bigger than 100. And I really don't want for us to be constrained that all we care about is that first 50 feet. We have within our state statutes the ability to regulate development in the 0 to 100. Let's not give away that 50 to 100 just because there is, quote, an undisturbed 50. Again, there are sometimes complicating factors like steepness of slope or value of a resource that say, yeah, we definitely want more than 50. But let's not just sell that 0 to 50. And then finally, at this point, Larry's observation of input, not just clarity. So we have had a revision over 11 years ago. I think when we're thinking about a revision here now, possibly the science has changed or developed, or we have another individual on here, potentially even more experienced than I am with upland impacts. I mean, I'm normally a water kind of guy, but Bill has been working in freshwater for a long time, and his work with our Massachusetts Conservation Commission handbook was wonderfully referenced. So at this moment, when we're thinking about revisions, clarity is important. And yes, that was an original direction for us to take, but let's not close it down to other things if we can make it better for the environment. You know, our goal is protection of our wetlands and water resources. If we can make it better with available science, we should be considering improvements to our 704 bylaws. Thank you.
Next speak. Bill?
Last summer, we had a meeting, I think it was August, where we met with the public and we got all kinds of feedback from them. At that hearing, and as well as the previous hearing, which we met live, I think it was in July, I've only attended 2 public meetings, literally in a town hall. I was sitting there with John Abadili, and we were debating whether or not you should have plantings where there was hardscape. At that time, I was, if you will, kind of going along with this concept that we need to clarify. And I don't like your, just let it naturally fill. That was my big beef. And it's like minor, really. And so since that time, we have had more than one occasion where the whole question of, what is and isn't a undisturbed buffer. And I could list some, but I don't want to get into the weeds and talk about people and stuff. But there was several engagements on that with projects. What is and isn't, and if it is, then you have, you can just totally do whatever you want to the 50 to 100. And so that was informing to me. And then we had that boathouse thing. That boathouse thing really was an eye-opener for me. I hadn't dealt with this business of water-dependent projects before. And again, thinking about how do people normally deal with boats? Well, heck, they put them on their property, they store them at their house, or they end up going to some boat storage facility. And then indeed, the house that we were debating, that's presumably what was done, or they, pulled it up out of the 0 to 50. And so I'm like going, I didn't like that. I felt pretty burned on that. I didn't feel right in my stomach. That was an awful decision. Now that's the way it went, but I'm thinking, so now here we are again. Well, what do we want to do with these regulations? And so I looked at them, and I looked kind of carefully at them. And the only performance standard really for 0 to 50 says something about an undisturbed buffer. That really, it doesn't really, it says you're supposed to have one. And, and that makes sense. The literature is just full of everything saying, you really need to have really tall grasses and trees and bushes to filter things out. And you also need, the wildlife have a real role, and we never consider that. And so as I'm sitting back, I'm going, wait a second. I think that the 0 to 50 is getting short shrift. It's just not, we're not protecting it. And yet from the standpoint of regulation, you all probably read my thing. I'm not really suggesting that we change the language per se about the 0 to 50 per se. It's more like, let's try to help it. Let's try to help the 0 to 50, because we allow mowing. Now it says an undisturbed buffer, you don't mow. Well, where is a 0 to 50 not mowed? It seems like if you go to a lakefront property, it's mowed and it goes down, way down. And it's like, we're not really, as a town, protecting our 0 to 50. And so I end up suggesting, look, we have not had a revision of this bylaw in 11 years. Are we going to go another 11 years? when do we really try to deal with these kinds of problems? And, you know, you look at the value of a 50 to 100, somewhat moving ahead here. You look at the value of a 50 to 100, as Pete said, it has value. Indeed, for wildlife, my God, wildlife that are of some value need 75 to 150 feet, it says. In fact, they could use 800 feet or 700 feet. And so just allowing that total development just really seems wrong to me. We're not protecting that element of the Wetlands Protection Act. We're just not. And so as we go forward with this, I'm left feeling as a commissioner, as we try to approve and update this thing, I would feel guilty going, yep, good enough. We'll talk for another 11 years. We'll look at it. No, we are a commission and we should think about the things that I said and what I recommended. And what I'm recommending are not onerous. They're not going to impact landowners big time. I'm suggesting, yeah, sure, do some more building in the 50 to 100, but you ought to be mitigating. You ought to be doing some plantings. No, you can't just take over the whole thing and pave it completely, cut down all the trees and do whatever the hell you want. That doesn't make sense. It's not good for wildlife. It's not, you're not fully protecting the resource. Taking 3/4 of pesticides out, is that good enough? I don't think so. So we should be mitigating. And I would suggest that by eliminating the loophole on, if you totally do the entire undisturbed buffer thing, you don't have to mitigate, you avoid all of that going around and around. Well, is it undisturbed or isn't it? And why couldn't they have a little exception? Look at that goes away. You're working on trying to protect the 0 to 50. Let's make that happen. And you don't get to take and just blow away the 50 to 100. And it would be so easy to just simply not have more boathouses if we all had, and this is going to sound terrible to spine, to just write in, it's not a water dependent thing. It's just not. We could just stop that debate, which ended up basically in the last one, it was sunsetted. I mean, we had a sunset. It's like, why don't we just stop that? Aren't we at the point where we want to protect the 0 to 50? And I had two things, my beef about sand, putting sand. I think we should make it clear. No, you're not putting sand in the pond nor right on the edge. Have a little statement. You can't put sand there. And then I do know, and this is a fact, we ended up having a new owner going back to historic photographs, brand new owner of a house, do a whole new sand beach thing. How do we ever stop that as a commission if we can't put in a sunset clause? That's minor. A buffer on the putting sand in, that's minor. Even the boathouse thing, that's minor. Allowing people to have a 3 to 1, requiring a 3 to 1 mitigation, even if you're well protected in the 0 to 50, for the benefit of wildlife and further pollution control. You know what? That's minor. We're not saying you can't build. I'll go on record, but if I'm here till I'm 90 years old, I'm going with you guys to allow additional development in the 50 to 100. You'll see that. Take video, record it, but let's mitigate for that. Let's not just box it all up so it's completely impacted. I'm asking, and then the in lieu fee thing I threw out there because it's like, wait a minute, 11 years, 350 square foot or whatever. I mean, that's chump change. Surely we can update that. I'm not looking for a lot, but here we are after 11 years. 11 years. Can we have a discussion? Can we have a discussion about like each of those items? Or maybe you have your own concerns. Maybe you've been struggling. Can't we talk about that and then present to the public? Hey, this is what we all think makes sense. It's, as Pete said, we're not interested. It's the 0 is not God. It's God is the resource. That's what we're protecting. That's the ultimate thing. And I don't think we're not doing that with the current thing. I have a hard time voting. Yeah, I agree for that. Let's chalk it up. This is November 2022 version. I can't do that. I don't think that's right. I think we're doing something wrong in the 0 to 50. Anyway, end of sermon. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Who wants to speak?
I do.
George?
Yeah, thanks. I was trying to find my hand. Good discussion here. I know where you're coming from, Bill. I really do. I think of so many instances. You say it won't affect people's ability to develop their properties. I look at the piece of property I'm on as I sit here in my house today. If what you're saying was in fact part of 704, I'm not sure I could build my house here. I'm on 1 3/4 acres. I have less than 1 acre of upland. My house is fully within the 100, but nothing. But I have an undisturbed 50. So I don't have enough area to mitigate for my house. If you wanted to mitigate in the 50 to 100, I have a totally undisturbed 50. But again, my house wouldn't be here probably.
Your house is there.
My house is there, but if somebody else came, they couldn't build this house today. If we passed what you're talking about, because they wouldn't have room to mitigate for it. And I sit on a parcel of land that has a wetland that was created by the town when they put in a culvert. So I have standing water down at the base of my property, and this wetland has been created by the town. So I've owned this piece of property for 20 years. I was fortunate enough that I built on it a number of years ago. But I just think that there's going to be these properties that people have owned for years, and Lord knows we need housing more than anything else on Cape Cod right now, and we need affordable housing. So are we going to eliminate? I don't know. I have a little problem with that. The other thing I'll say is, everything we do is on a case by case basis. And I really, really like John, Tom, and Louise. And by the way, thank you guys for the work you did on this. But I really like that final commission may at its own discretion consider intrusion in the 50-foot, blah, blah, blah. It gives the commission some leeway. And also, I'll also say that, Bill, you said we never consider wildlife. Well, Pete always considers wildlife. So I think that is a consideration. But I just have a little. I'm troubled by making this more restrictive at this point. I get where you're coming from, Bill, but I'm not sure we're at that point. I don't know when the point is right or when it's wrong, but that's all I got for now. Thank you.
One thing a couple of things I just wanted to mention. One, I think we have to build in some flexibility because, as you know, the town has so many different types and shapes of parcels that has their limitations in terms of how much they can provide in terms of the mitigation and so forth. And we have seen different things. And, we should have that leeway. I mean, during this draft, John keep reminding us, we cannot write the language to cover every single scenario. And we can try our best to cover it, but we also have to leave some leeway for the commissioner to make a final determination based on each individual parcels. So that kind of shape up that discussion. So John?
Yeah, thank you. And I hope I'm not getting confrontational here, but Larry, I totally have a problem with your continually negative feelings about how Tom set up this process. He has brought it before this commission on multiple times, including tonight. He has said if we're going to do it again, we can do it again and again and again. And the fact that he asked 2 of us to help him, plus the staff, 2 other staff, so that there were 5 of us. I don't think you have any right to be condemning Tom's process or the process we use. That's my view. Now, I'm very interested in a couple of things. I strongly agree with my good friend Peter. God, I hate to say that. In many ways. I mean, I think our primary responsibility clearly is environmental protection. I think to both Bill and Peter, your issue of, even if you had an undisturbed 50 and you want to only expand in the 50 to 100, and we say no, right now the regs say no mitigation is required. Should we rethink that? I think you both raised a very valid question right there. I think Bill raises a very valid question relative to the in lieu fee. So, Bill, I would agree with you on both of those. Now, I'm not sure, because I also strongly agree with George. I am also a waterfront property owner, and I've been over the last 18 years to multiple locations where if we said you must mitigate, even if you have an undisturbed 50, if we said you still must mitigate at a ratio of 3 to 1 to expand in the 50 to 100, there'd be a lot of houses that couldn't do anything, including George's that couldn't be built, and probably mine that couldn't be built with that requirement. So I think, Bill, that issue requires some conversation and some thinking. Is there something we could do given a specific site to enhance the buffer protection of the 50 to 100 while still allowing, a house to be built or a bedroom to be added or whatever? Somewhere in the bill, I think there's got to be a balance. I honestly don't know what it is. But I think it's a valid issue worth consideration. I honestly think that this, Bill, where you and I would strongly disagree, is that when somebody removes something from the 0 to 50, the way the reg is written is that either we allow it to grow back naturally or it's got to be replanted at the sole discretion of the commission. I think that is exactly the way we should rate that. I really do, because it's a site-specific thing. It gives us the absolute authority to decide what to do and not prejudging. If it's a small incursion and there's plants all around it, blah, blah, blah. We've had examples of where natural regrowth is going to be as good as anything. So I think it should be site-specific in the discretion of the commission. I do think, as I say, I don't agree with your issue on replenishing sand and grandfathering that. I think where the policy we've established of if you have a historical beach, you may restore that historical beach if it's washed out. I think the waterways, especially freshwater systems, a cyanobacteria problem. I think to say to a homeowner, the sand is causing a problem, I just can't reach the balance that George brings up. The right of a homeowner, especially in Cape Cod, to say, listen, that beach has been there 50 years, but it's washed out some, and I want to rebuild it just the way it was. I'm not going to add a new beach. I'm not going to expand it. I really, Bill, respectfully disagree with you on that issue, just where I'm coming from. I think it's the potential negative to homeowners in Barnstable is greater than possible environmental positive impacts of the sand migrating when we're dealing with nitrogen loading systems that create cyanobacteria in our freshwater. That's horrible. So that's where I'm coming from on that issue. So at that point, I too will stop.
One thing I just want to mention, though, I read about I read Bill's comment about the in lieu fee. I know, 11 years passed and we haven't done anything. So that's something that, we can follow up on, but I'm also checking with the legal, what is our proper protocol in terms of updating the law. So I'm just waiting to see any other, legal comment on that before we come back. Louise?
Yes, I agree about the in lieu fee. I think it is ridiculously low. And we ought to work to increase it. Getting back to the question of protecting the 50 to 100, I agree that we should look into how we can do more for the 50 to 100, but at the current proposal that Bill put on the table, think about it this way: with a 3-to-1 mitigation ratio, we're leaving only a quarter of the 50 to 100 available for development. And with that, my house, all the houses along Shoestring Bay out to Ryfield Point would not exist if that regulation had been in place at the time that we built our homes. So I think that we need to figure out a better way, more equitable way to enhance or protect the 50 to 100.
Who's next? There's so many hands in here.
I think.
Who?
Bill?
Peter?
I think. Is it?
I think Larry had his hand up next.
Yeah, Larry.
I remember I've listened to the 2011 tapes, all of them, and even took notes on them to try to figure out how certain issues came up then and how they've been handled since then. And the biggest conceptual struggle that I have seen for myself, I've seen within the commission process, I've seen it within the consultant community, has been the mitigation calculations. Now, I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm not saying that they should be abolished. I'm saying that there is a lack of flexibility in those calculations in light of the specific property that I think that we would be well advised to consider. In that regard, my suggestion conceptually would be to, first of all, define the entire property, including the resource area, and then determine what improvements or changes are being made in those areas, rather than just mandating a 4-to-1 here and a 3-to-1 there and a 2-to-1 there, or maybe a credit over here. I think there's got to be some flexibility, and I think that the impetus should be, and I go back to I'm going to go back to what John Abadili said a minute ago about the 0 to 50, but I'm going to say, and I wrote this in my revision, saying, let the applicant make a proposal, and then we can either accept it or revise it. Let them be the ones that propose it rather than us just saying, we don't like this. This is what we're going to require you to do. If you do it that way, and I can't speak for the consultants or the applicants yet, but once we hear them, we may have a better insight. And that is, let them contribute to this process in terms of how the whole project is to be developed, because we are lucky in this community to be to have primarily well informed, professional, educated, articulate consultants, and in many cases that the property owners are as well. They learn what's going on. So as if we want to keep it general right now for the overall, I'd like to see some flexibility as to how mitigation calculations are determined and how they're applied.
Can I ask Larry a question? Larry,
go ahead and ask me now, but let me remind me. I want to go to something you brought up. So go ahead.
Okay, I'm
John.
sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, your thought on that flexibility. One of the things, the feedback, that we've all had over the last bunch of years from consultants is, tell us what you want so we can advise our customers. So
I understand.
One of the things they sort of liked is clarity, that it is 3-to-1. If I make 3-to-1, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Our balance was to try and say, well, okay, but at the discretion of the commission, so we can review them site specific. So I understand where you're coming from, but I think feedback we might get from consultants, the more specificity we can give them, the happier they would be. I suspect, Larry. I'm not sure, but
That's
again,
fine.
when we go to the public, we'll find out.
And if that happens, that's fine. I'm not running up a flagpole and expect everybody to salute the flag. I'm just saying these are some of the concepts that had these discussions been occurring among 7 of us all along, we might have broadened into that area. The other thing I want to mention though was your description of the 0 to 50, where let's say something was removed. Let's say it was a remnant of a shed or a slab of some sort, or something was removed within the 0 to 50. And sometimes it may have just been removed just to get it out of there so that they're not being pressured to do something else with it.
Right.
That too is where that would be an area where the applicant could say, we're going to remove this and this and this from the 0 to 50, and this is what we'd like to do. We'd like to propose vegetation here, or we'd like to allow certain things to grow back because it's next to vegetation that is going to grow. I put that in there only just to open that door.
But that, Larry, excuse me, again, isn't that exactly what we said?
I think so.
I didn't read it that way. If I wouldn't put it in if I read it that way.
Well, again, I'm not arguing words, but I think that is exactly what we said. And in fact, we changed it a little bit. I think Bill had brought this point up in early conversation that, if they remove hardscape, it's got to be replanted either there or elsewhere. And Bill, this kind of came up with the issue that you had raised at one of those discussions. So that's, I think, the way it's written now, Larry.
Well, I'll try
that's the way it's written.
I'll try to reread it, and if
Okay.
not, I'll call you. Well, you can tell me over the phone where it is. But right now, I put things in there not to confuse it, not to cloud it, just to try to have there be some flow and consistency. And that was the approach I took, because it's like anything. You can put the words in and you can pare them back or trim them down.
Well, conceptually, I think I certainly agree with what you said. I thought that's what we had written. So, but conceptually, I agree, Larry.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm done for the moment. I'm trying to confine it to what the other people are saying as well as what I've said. So let's. You got Pete, Bill, and somebody else is probably in the parking lot's got their hand up. So.
Before I go to Pete, one thing I just want to mention during the redraft, we went through different scenarios how we can cover all that stuff. And then often, Darcy reminds us, under these situations that this happened. So we're trying to cover all these stuff, and it's very difficult to have those language to cover every single detail. And I think that's what we cover in terms of language, build some flexibility in the language to cover it. So I think that's what we did.
I could read that sentence, Larry, if you want, Tom, or go on.
Yeah.
Is Abel going to read something, or are you? What is it? Am I going to speak?
No, Pete, you go.
Okay, got it.
Rats. God.
So, Abel, I'm going to buy you a beer next time I see you. I mean, we're buddies.
I love you, Sampo.
This is great. So, I think we're all agreeing that the in lieu fee is silly cheap. So that's a great agreement. We don't have to say what price it is, but that is a very positive result of our quick discussion so far. Secondly, I will mention that Sandy Neck on the board that I sit representing us changes our fees all the time, and we've upped them repeatedly over the last decade. So I don't see any legal problem with that. In terms of our concern for homeowners or houses that have already been built and have standing because they are all built, and this lack of, we got a 50-foot buffer, but we do have stuff in the 100-foot buffer, whether we're on 3 bays or whether we're on Shoestring Bay. Those of you who have lived there for decades, because I remember three bays back in 99, 2000, and Shoestring Bay. A lot has changed in these 2 water environments for the worse. And if there's anyone in this commission that thinks it's gotten better, please convince me that it has gotten better.
Wouldn't argue that one, Pete.
It's gotten worse. So at least the restrictions that we have tried to place on development and nutrient inputs and any other pollutant and any other pollutants that are going in. What we've tried to do, well, it has not preserved these embayments. So as we go forward, accepting what we did in the past is just fine for our future doesn't necessarily make great sense. I mean, we're not doing good for our coastal waters. Increased development pressure is happening. I mean, in our future, is every undeveloped lot buildable? I don't know, because I mean, you can cut up a lot so it has a minimal amount of building space to maximize how many houses you can put on what used to be a 3 or 4 acre waterfront property. So I'm just please cautioning my fellow commissioners to look into our future. We want a coastal environment that's getting cleaner, it's getting more aesthetically pleasing. We don't want this continuation, slow drag down into, you know, a green, not quite dead zone, but, you know, certainly a less desirable environment full of noxious weeds, whether it's freshwater or saltwater. So don't forget that, you know, our job is really to try to make things better. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Pete. Bill?
I think this is a valuable, important discussion, and I look forward to the next one as well. I think this has been really good. First of all, regarding the 50 to 100 and the need to mitigate regardless of whether you have a intact 0 to 50, that's an interesting discussion. I think that, you know, in the case of George or perhaps John, who live in these, if you will, constrained areas, they have a house. And back in the 80s, people were plugging in houses, and I've seen houses, several of them, that are built right in the 0 to 50. You've seen them, we've all seen them. And then major, you know, footprints in the 50 to 100. I guess what I'm thinking is that you shouldn't be able, I would say to George, you shouldn't be able to just put in your patios and your decks and cut everything down and just totally, you know, because you're in this little place that you can't do anything more. You are now grandfathered. You're there. And I think that Louise made a really great point. Yeah, I thought this was wonderful. She says, well, look, if you got a 3 to 1, that means 3/4 of that undeveloped area can't be built on. And I thought about that. I thought that's a really good point, Louise. Very good point, Louise.
Right.
But maybe we continue to mitigate. You don't just pay paradise and just put in a parking lot and cut everything down. You know, you have some constraints, and so might it be that we have a 2 to 1? Is it a 1 to 1 mitigation? Whatever. But I do think that just allowing people just to completely build out that 50 to 100 is not good, and it runs contrary to salamander, amphibian, turtle life histories. It just does. These things move up. As a wildlife biologist, I know this, and I provided the texts and whatnot in that appendix that talks about amphibians and turtles. And indeed, there are birds and mammals that are cited in that report, which I did not include. And so I think that having some mitigation makes sense. And I really appeal to you to consider modifying the bylaw so that we don't just simply keep it to the 0 to 50, good to go, and now we're just going to completely pave it. I mean, that bothers me. With regard to plantings, I guess I still seriously, well, I disagree with John. I don't think you should allow things to just fill in naturally. You take off the hardscape. You shouldn't just go away. Mother Nature will take care of it, because an exposed soil, that is what invasive species colonize. That's notorious. If you get into invasive species biology, that's what they love. And so therefore, all I'm suggesting is that we, as John would say, we make the determination. Let's figure out how it's planted. Is it planted with lawn? Because sometimes that's going to be an appropriate response right up against the house or wherever the heck. And, or is it going to be shrubs and trees? We should do that, but we shouldn't just allow Mother Nature to sow invasives in there. And I really think that's important. I think
But we do have that authority, Bill. You understand that?
What's that?
Excuse me. We absolutely wrote this to give us that authority to do that, to do exactly what you're saying.
Correct. But to say to allow it to fill in naturally, I would suggest never. You should never allow it to just fill in naturally.
And all I'm suggesting is on a site-specific basis. And we've had these where there was a 2-foot thing in there, and it was surrounded by vegetation. And Ed said to us, "Oh, this will come back in months." So all I'm saying is that we look at those. Commission, in its sole discretion, has the right to look at it. That's all I'm saying. And every single one of them, we could require replanting. Every one of them, if that's what we choose to do. You just got to have some faith that we as commissioners will do that. That's all I'm arguing. I'm sorry to interrupt. I apologize.
Thank you. With regard to sand and sand beaches, we know that sand, when you're placing sand in a 0 to 50, it is not acting as a filter. The entire, that 5 volume pages that I gave you from the Mac handbook on buffers, dated 2019, makes it clear that sand is not acting as a filter. We are ruining the function of that. And I am not suggesting that we outlaw that because of precedent and grandfather, and is it a taking? I get that, but I do believe that when you end up having a change, a transfer of ownership, new owner, we can say, done doing that because of the impact to the 0 to 50. I don't know how else you stop that bad practice, which is clear if you understand buffer functions in ecology. I don't get that. And with regard to sand in the pond or like right on the edge, sand is a pollutant. We stop erosion. We're all about stopping erosion. What's eroding? It's sand. It's sand itself. And that's what we're putting in there, just we're allowing. Well, I will tell you that in a conversation I had with, I think, Tom, months ago, that he suggested, well, we don't allow that. We don't allow sand being put in the pond. Well, I don't know that to be true or false, other than Tom said it to be so, but why not just simply make sure we're not putting sand, other than 5 feet inland, and that we sunset that. And I didn't hear any discussion about a boathouse. And I really, not time, we can do that. It's a simple thing. It wouldn't, I think it would be easily defensible. And we never talked about my other, and essentially the only other point that I made, which is invasive species management shouldn't be done with a bulldozer. And that's not the normal thing that's done. That's not normally done, but there was a pond that remains nameless where that effectively happened. Just total, let's just take out the 0 to 50 and we're going to now, we shouldn't allow that. That does not seem, because, it's very harmful. I mean, it really is. And I think we should not allow bulldozers. If you want to take it out by hand, if you want to end up digging it up by hand, if you want to end up using the herbicides or what have you, fine, but not bring in a bloody bulldozer. It's not a common thing, but it happened, and I would hate to see that happen again.
We don't do that as a practice.
No.
That often that would be either under the control of the construction protocol when we review it, and that's what that would be described in there. But as far as your sand, usually we place the sand above the mean high water mark. from the beach area and not at the edge of the water. But who is up? George?
Yes, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I think all that's, I don't know what project you're referring to, Bill, about the bulldozer, but I think, and Darcy could probably add to this, but I mean, usually there's 9 times out of 10, there's always a work protocol, and that's approved by staff and gone over with staff prior to work. So I'm not sure what project you're referring to. I'd like to go back to what Pete referred to. He talked about looking into the future. Well, I'd like to look into the past a little bit. And it seems to me that, obviously it's the construction in these areas that are subject to our regulations that have the amount of construction that has got us to where we are today. What's the primary source of our problem? Title V system.
Absolutely.
So, we're talking about planning in the 50 to 100. I'm talking about sewers, AI systems, and I go back to AI systems with you, Bill. I'm a big believer. We got to start promoting that somehow, and that's for down the road. But we got to get rid of our septic system, our Title V systems. We got a sewer. We got to get our AI systems in. That's where we're really going to make a difference in our waterways. And I don't think by putting in a 3 to 1 in an area of 50 to 100 is going to do it for us today. I think we're beyond that, and we got to get these septic systems sewered and these AI systems, whatever that takes. And we also, I think we got to come up with a way to mitigate or find a mitigation formula or whatever for these AI systems, because it's important that we promote that. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, just before I forget, can I call on John to read that section he was going to read to Larry? If he remembers what it was.
Yeah.
Can you say what the number is? I actually didn't know that new thing that you were talking about, John. Excuse me. What is it? It's 70 what? 3, 4?
7044B4 under the red line. I think that's what Larry was addressing. Anyways, it says any area exposed due to hardscape removal shall be planted in that area or elsewhere or left to fill in naturally as determined by the commission. So I think that's what, Larry, that's what you said.
Okay.
And that elsewhere bill was put in because you brought that up. And I know you disagree with, left to grow naturally. What happened? Oh, there it is.
So what you're saying, John, is that you consider that one phrase under number 4 to be sufficient and complete. I just want to go. I'll have to go back on my own and revisit it.
Okay.
To see what I put in.
Okay.
To see if there's something else. But I have no trouble with that. But
okay.
While in the interim, I found that paragraph also. So I just haven't had my hand up to bring it up. So
okay.
Okay. So is it my turn now on one other matter?
Sure. Larry.
Can we go back to that full screen? Thank you.
Bill, I'm going to go back to you on, you mentioned a couple of things, but I'm going to go back about the boathouse situation. And I have no experience with boathouse in terms of owning them or using them, and I don't have any love affair with the boathouse. However, the key language there is water dependent. And were it not for a boat in the water, would there be a need for a boathouse? And is the boathouse itself the problem, or is it the location of the structure? I think we've got a lot of issues to deal with to define that properly, and I don't think we can just write it down that all of a sudden that is no longer a water dependent structure. To me, if we did that, I can see plenty of litigation emerging to challenge the sufficiency of that definition. That's, to me, it's a good issue to talk about. And as a matter of fact, in some of my draft comments, I included some of the things that I knew Bill was interested in, and I did it intentionally so that he would have the opportunity to address it and present it. I have no trouble with that. I'm just saying I don't see that that's a fell swoop resolution that we should be focusing on. I think we got plenty of other things to deal with at the time being.
Who's next, Bill?
Yeah, I totally agree with the need to deal with Title V and AI, George. I mean, there's no question that is a biggie. And it will certainly help our coastline and our base. There's no doubt about it. But I think that if we think that that is it, I believe that we're missing our responsibility to try to protect the bay from other pollutants, I mean, that are not being filtered, that would be more fully filtered if, but that you had a larger filter strip in the 50 to 100. In fact, pollutants in general are totally taken out by 100 feet, not 50 feet. And sediment is an exception. I'm noticing that sediment is, pretty much taken care of in the 50, the 0 to 50, assuming that you have high grasses and shrubs and stuff like that, and it's filtering through it. It's not a sand-covered thing or a mown lawn. I think that if we are so focused on that 0 to 50, we're missing the other values of the 50 to 100. And indeed, I do believe that the amphibian and reptile values, wetland-dependent reptiles and wetland-dependent amphibians, are being affected. They're being adversely affected by simply allowing us to totally fill in that 50 to 100, because we've got the 0 to 50 taken care of. And so, yeah, IA's work, George, yeah, that's an important thing. But if we don't just that's it, we're good to go. I don't think that's the case. I think we're abdicating a responsibility there. And as far as the boathouse goes, people use other means to house their boats. They don't have to have, it's not a necessity to have a boathouse. They have other alternative ways of taking care of their boats. And it's, it just seems to me that I don't see how that would be appealable. Yeah, there would be maybe some objections, but I think we could win on the basis that it is not something for which there is, that there are alternatives and that there are impacts associated. We want to say why we are not interested in having that. I'm not sure how that, is worked out, but we can defend that. I believe we can defend why we don't want to have boathouses in this day and age built, boat sheds on a 0 to 50. And we could do it. We could do it really easily. Yes, it would require, we probably will have to deal with it on an appeal or a suit or what have you. But I think we can do that. And I encourage you guys to step up and try to deal with that.
Couple of things though is just a general discussion. Is like a boathouse versus a boat accessory structure is two different things. So sometimes we have to really define what it is, and moving forward, because a lot of the times the consultant called a boathouse is not really a boathouse. So so we have to be careful. The other aspect of the thing that I just want to make a comment though is, IA system is not a ultimate solution in the sense that IA system can remove total nitrogen, but not phosphorus at this point. So you're only removing part of the, nutrient from the source. Ultimately, the town is doing the sewering and so forth. So we have to work with, looking at that schedule-wise and see how it works in different regions to improve the watershed. It's not just replacing, yes, we replace 10 septic system with the IA system. We are done. We're not done. like you said, there's still a lot of things that we need to improve as far as the environment. So right now, from the Board of Health side, we are looking at that and see how we can work with the DPW, have a more holistic plan of doing that stuff. So let me go back to John.
Couple of things. I have to say, Bill, I really do, on this boathouse issue, and Peter and I had several conversations about it. In that last one with Arlene, both Peter and I tried to say, are there alternatives to a boat accessory shed or whatever we call the thing? And I must say, Arlene presented some very effective arguments to say none of these alternatives in this specific case are reasonable. Now, again, we can argue or disagree on that, but I, for one, if an application is presented tomorrow, one of my first questions would be, are there options for this homeowner other than building this structure by the dock or on the beach or wherever? But I do agree with Larry. I think legally, the words water dependent facility, I think it is not as simple as saying, we're not going to say a boat storage shed is not water dependent. I think that would create some very significant legal arguments for a court to look at. So that's just my opinion, anyways. But I agree, and I think Peter would agree with this. I personally kind of look at, are there ways to say, no, you cannot have this because you have these options available to you? Arlene effectively cut off a lot of those arguments in that particular case, but that is an approach I would take if it came up again tomorrow somewhere else. I'd like to say two other things. Number one, Peter, I agree with you. Our responsibility as a conservation commission, the way you espoused it, I would absolutely agree with. We're also, and this is really a hard role, we're also part of the town of Barnstable and represent in so many ways the citizens of Barnstable. And so the point that George brings up is right. We have to be concerned with all of the other issues surrounding the town of Barnstable. And so we try to draft regulations that will allow us to look at a balance. It can't be all one way or all another way. I think we have to maintain the ability to look at every site and try to balance one against the other, one opposing issue against the other. Final comment I'd make, I think, and I'm trying to wrap this up. There are at least two issues that I think that a majority of the commissioners have agreed on. I think, Tom, you may disagree with this. One of them is the in-lieu fee, and I think we all kind of agree we should be looking at that. I think the second one, and I'm speaking for myself now, but I think I heard a majority say, okay, if it says if it is a fully undisturbed 50, they want to add hardscape in the 50 to 100. And I agree with Bill on this, it isn't just the IA system. There are other reasons why the bays are getting messed up from road runoff, et cetera, that a buffer zone can protect against. So I think Bill raises a very good point. I think, Tom, if it was me, I'd say, okay, I'd like every commissioner to address the issue and come up with suggestions to say, if they get a fully undisturbed 50, somebody wants to increase hardscape in the 50 to 100, what are our standards? Right now, the standard is you can do whatever you want. Bill and Peter raised an effective argument, in my opinion, that says, whoa, wait a minute, is that giving away too much? I think I heard you say, okay, maybe it isn't going to be, well, if you got an undisturbed 50, you don't have to do anything, but maybe it's not 3 to 1. Maybe it's something less than that. Or maybe if you gave us an AI system instead. So maybe, Tom, we should take a couple of weeks and say, okay, commissioners, submit your thoughts to Tom, and then let's see how they all come out. I'm trying to reach a consensus here, is what I was trying to do. So I'll stop at that one.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome, Bill.
Thank you. I like that.
That's what I get for meeting at the post office.
Thank you.
That's just a thought, Thomas.
I think this is a good general discussion among ourselves, and we haven't had these discussions on this subject or any subjects for a while. And this is an interesting thing that, we can look at that. And then, if you can provide, your suggestion or comment stuff so that we can take a look holistically and see how we can change it in terms of the chapter 704 for the better for the future.
So there really are those two issues, Tom, that I think we sort of reached them. The in lieu, if legally we could do it, and I think Pete is right. I don't know any restrictions, but you got to get the law division to agree with that. And then maybe Darcy could come up with some numbers based on some research she could do. And I think this other, far more difficult issue is the 50 to 100.
Right.
What can we, and if you have an undisturbed 50, we now allow, do whatever you want. Bill and Peter raised really good points. What can we do to reach a balance on that issue? That's what I'm struggling with.
Yep. Pete?
I completely agree with that, Bo.
Whoa, God, did you hear that? Jeez, I'm not going to sleep tonight.
Larry?
I agree with John to the extent that he has defined the issue well. I don't mean that that's all, but I think it's very, for better or for worse, John and I and our training and our experience is a good cause for a lobotomy. I think that we've been locked into the manner in which we think, and I remember when I was a mediator in the Barnstable District Court for many years, and I had to undo my experience as a lawyer because nobody understood it. And I understand that, and I try to be respectful of that with all of you. I raised my hand this time to go to 704-7, where the red line deals with the Pre-Wetland Protection Act clause. I see some changes I'm going to suggest to that in due time, but my thought is this is where my cross-referencing comes in, and I hope that the rest of the commission sees the value in that, so that as consultants or applicants are going through it, they get to a certain provision and then a cross-reference can be included to another section. That being the case, I see this particular language being one of the prime examples that it could be plunked in several places, and I will, between now and the next time, come up with a suggestion as to where and how it can be used.
Thank you, Larry. Bill?
I like John's first 2 points. Regarding the invasive species and removing it with heavy machinery, I guess I retract the need for that, but I do believe that in the case of a pond, it was 24 Flume Ave. They just took a bulldozer and just went right in and pulled out so much, all the vegetation, and I think that's wrong. And I think we need to be, as a commission, really mindful of that. And I'd be opposed to using that kind of equipment and making it clear. But I would retract that. Regarding the boathouse, are boathouses across the board completely accepted, legal, built in all the towns from Fall River to Provincetown? I mean, how did any of the towns ever stop the proliferation of boathouses? Is that something that we want to look at? Is there some additional consideration to just simply throw up our hands and say, we're going to lose in a court? I don't think we necessarily would. I think we could make some kind of argument why this is not something that we want in our town. Yeah, why there are impacts associated with that, why there are alternatives to that. And I can see that, that you don't have a lot of appetite for that, but I think we ought to consider how to deal with that and whether other towns have dealt with that.
Pete, you have something?
Yes, please. What I liked about ABO's recommendation for these 2 things is we are pretty close to agreeing on something, further discussion as well. But what I hope everyone realizes is that other issues that have been brought up tonight are not over with. And this, but let's just take two things that we can work on. Try to reach a consensus, build it in well. Bill, you know I hated that boat shed. I'm not gonna call it a boathouse, that boat shed, because I got a boat shed right out here in the backyard. But let's not worry about that right now. Let's go with the two things that Abbo's got us thinking about and hash that, and just not throw, Larry, we're not putting anything in the trash bin yet. Just let's start with something we're agreeing on and work on that.
Thank you, Pete. So we have some kind of focus in terms of what we want to do. Otherwise, we'll be all going all different directions that we are not going to get something done. So with that, let's say, let's say in a month right now, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, send your comment or suggestions to Darcy so that we can circulate the comment or suggestion from the commissioner so that we can take a look at that. Is that okay?
Would you also pursue the fee thing with legal, and then maybe Darcy could do some research on that number?
Yep, I'll do that.
Okay.
I sent an email to the legal, so trying to get some opinion on that this afternoon already. So, any other comment from the commissioner?
Tom, what happens if you refer it to legal, but legal doesn't have an answer? They may have access to some other methods by which this is used, but they may not be your only source. Part of it is what is the in lieu fee supposed to be? Is it a property value issue? Is it equivalent to an assessment? I think you might want to broaden your approach, not just to throw it at legal, but to figure out what other ways the concept can be addressed. I'm not trying to make it into turn it from 2 items to 200 items, but I think that it is an issue. It is a topic that came up 11 years ago. It was implemented, and now we're discovering that it's got some uncertainties and flaws. And I think that's what we're trying to do. So I would encourage you to broaden it, even to the point of delegating it to other people, whether it's any of us or some other people that are knowledgeable about that sort of thing, and just tell us this is what you've done. In other words, just say, we've found John Doe who really knows these issues. I'd encourage you to do that, because otherwise we may come up with a legal interpretation, but is it a financial, or is it have some other definition that we should be considering?
Well, legal is one factor, and come up with some numbering is a different factor. So
I understand.
So I'll keep my open mind in terms of approaching this. So we all set on this discussion, Bill?
I'm just going to be a pain in the butt.
Oh God.
I mean, okay, we're going to look at these two things. I get that. Okay. And I mentioned the boathouse. We should be considering how we might avoid more boathouses. I mean, they're just not needed. They really aren't needed. And the other thing is that we know that placing sand in the 0 to 50 is not a good thing. We are not even interested in allowing it unless there's a grandfather clause that someone's liable to come to over. And it seems like it's a bad thing. It's contrary to the science. And I have only suggested that we have a sunset clause on the transfer of ownership on that practice, which we know is bad, which runs counter to the science. And I know, you're deep sixing my points here, except for 2 of them. But I do believe that whole sunset clause on beach sand is a legitimate, scientifically defensible thing that we should do.
Now, excuse me, but at some point, I mean, we heard your argument, and I see Peter shaking his head. Somebody else, and maybe a majority of the commission, may disagree with the point you're making. All I'm trying to say is at some point we've got to move forward, and that's all. And that's respectfully said, and I really do mean that, Bill.
I get it.
Please.
Okay, fair enough.
So You have your homework with you. And so send your comment or suggestions to Darcy in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks, so that we can circulate some of your comments, so that we can take a look and come back with you and schedule another discussions. Our next hearing is November the 22nd. Could I have a motions to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Sampu,
Aye.
Warren,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Hearn,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Abadili,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. We are adjourned at 8 p.m. on the button.
Thank you.
Very good discussion, everybody, in my opinion.
Good discussion.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Aye.